Viognier is a variety that's really synonymous with Yalumba. We were one of the first wineries in Australia to start to work with this variety in 1980. And I know that sounds like a long time ago, but in the history of wines and in the time it takes to plant a vineyard and to establish a wine style, 3.5 decades really isn't all that long. When we planted Viognier in 1980, we think there were probably only about 11 hectares of the variety in the world. That's not a lot. It was really almost extinct. And at the same time, there were other wineries that were planting it around the world, and it's grown in popularity since then. Although it is still quite a niche variety. It's not as popular and not as well known as Chardonnay, for example. But we love Viognier, and there's a couple of reasons why we do. And one is because it's such a beautifully flavoured wine. It's got so much character, so much texture, so many flavours, and it is such a versatile variety, particularly with food. Probably not a variety that I would recommend as an aperitif because it is very rich and succulent. But to pair with food, whether it's food that you might think goes well with with a white wine, or in fact whether it's food that you would typically match with a red wine, Viognier will go really well with it. It's quite a powerful wine that was quite good even with red meat. It's also fantastic to go with spicy food, so things like curries, a lot of the Asian influences that have a lot of spice or pepper, and one of my particular favourites, which is that sort of things like Moroccan food and the tagines, where there's lots of layers of flavours and spices, often very slow cooked. It always reminds me of the process of making these wines, which takes a lot of time as they wines that age in barrels after they've been fermented with the wild yeast from the vineyards. The Chardonnay, the Viognier and the Roussanne are all fermented only with the yeasts that come out of the vineyard. We talk about them as wild ferments, indigenous ferments, sometimes we talk about them as feral ferments, but what that means is that we're not adding a packet of yeast or a cultured yeast to the wines. We're only letting the yeast that are existing in the vineyards that come in on the grapes do that fermentation. And that gives us a lot of complexity because there's a wide variety of different types of yeast that come in. It gives you intensity, it gives you some nice subtlety on the palate in terms of more creaminess. And it also means that the wines are fresh and they have a beautiful ability to age. So while these wines certainly don't need to be aged, you could absolutely keep these for quite a few years and they will still have that lovely freshness and complexity when you open them. Viognier always reminds me of walking through a stone fruit orchard. It's got lots of flavours of apricots, lots of honeysuckle sort of flavours. It's got a lot of texture to it. It's not a particularly high acid variety, although it does have a lot of lovely freshness and length of palate, but the acidity is soft. So for those people that find varieties perhaps like Riesling or Sauvignon Blanc a little bit too zingy and a little bit too acidic, Viognier is a much better wine for them. It's also a wine that I've heard many people talk about as the only white variety that they like drinking. I'm a red wine drinker, so many people say. I only like red wines, and yet they have a Viognier and they go, oh, I rather like that. Because a lot of the way that it behaves in the mouth is sometimes red wine-like. So don't think about it just as a white wine, think about a wine that will cross over some of those boundaries and surprise you with what it will do.